So let's talk about how to set up and design a work sprint so that you get the maximum ROI from it. Step 1 is to pick the date. Now, you might have thought that I would have suggested to pick the project first, but I usually pick the date first, and it usually ends up being completely beyond my control. Okay, step 2 is to choose what project you are going to work on. What is something on your plate that you either need to make massive progress on or you want to make massive progress on? And the keyword is massive, because during a work sprint, we're not putzing our way through a few tasks. We are bulldozing our way through a project. You might not finish it, but you're bulldozing your way forward. Then at the end, when you come up for air, you turn around and you see that very visible path that you bulldozed. You're in a massively different place from when you started. The progress is big. You feel good about it. You feel lighter. I mean, you feel exhausted, but you feel lighter because you're that much closer to the finish line. Okay, so you've picked your day and you picked your task, and the next step is to organize the logistics.